The white news van pulled into Gull'sHaven just after 10 in the morning, with its satellite dish folded down against the roof. Channel 7 Portland was painted across both sides in bold blue letters. The van navigated Main Street slowly, the driver taking in the historic buildings and the general postcard quality of the place. Halloween was a couple of weeks away, and someone at the station had decided this coastal town, with its supposedly enthusiastic ghost culture, would make a perfect light feature for the weekend broadcast. Derek Chen, the reporter, sat in the passenger seat reviewing his notes. Mid-30s, practiced smile, the kind of easy confidence that came from doing these sorts of stories dozens of times. Maria Santos was already thinking about shots, the harbor in the background, maybe some B-roll of the old church and cemetery. These Halloween pieces were easy. Get some locals talking about their ghost stories, film the decorations, capture that small-town charm, done by lunch. Derek had done minimal research. A few social media posts had caught the assignment editor's attention, videos of someone disappearing and reappearing at a local bar, obviously some kind of stage magic or clever editing, but good viral content. And apparently there were popular ghost tours run by some local character in full colonial costume. Perfect material for a fun, light-hearted segment. They parked near Town Hall, a modest brick building that looked like it had been standing since the 1800s. Derek straightened his tie, Maria grabbed her camera, and they headed inside. The town clerk, Helen Pritchard, looked up from her desk as they entered. She was maybe 60, with reading glasses on a chain and a cardigan despite the reasonable temperature. She seemed genuinely pleased to see them, the way small town officials often were when the news showed interest. Derek introduced himself and explained they were doing a piece on Gull'sHaven's Halloween traditions, particularly the ghost tours and the town's historical characters. Helen brightened and began talking about the town's founding in 1744, the maritime history, the way the community took pride in preserving its heritage. She pulled out a few pamphlets from the Historical Society, pointing out significant buildings, notable families, shipwrecks, and lighthouses. She mentioned Augustus Alby's ghost tours with genuine enthusiasm, noting they'd become quite popular, especially since he'd added those special theatrical elements. Derek asked if she believed in ghosts herself. Helen laughed and said she believed in good stories. The town had plenty of those, passed down through generations. Whether they were true or not, well, that depended on who was telling them. Maria filmed the exchange, getting shots of the historical documents, the old photographs on the walls, Helen's friendly face as she talked about her town. It was exactly what they needed, authentic small-town charm with just enough mystery to keep viewers interested. Helen gave them directions to Alby's Antiques, just down Main Street, and wished them luck with their story. The antique shop was easy to spot, with its carefully painted sign and window display of vintage items. Augustus Alby was inside, going through a collection of old photographs when Derek and Maria entered. He looked up, and his entire demeanor shifted, the way a stage actor might when recognizing an audience. Derek explained their purpose, and Augustus immediately became animated. He talked about his ghost tours with theatrical gestures, describing how he'd researched the town's history extensively, how he wore authentic period costume, how tourists came from all over New England to experience his presentations. The tours had been featured in several regional publications, he noted. They were becoming quite the attraction. When Derek asked about filming him in costume, Augustus insisted. He ran up the stairs to his apartment above the store and was back down in minutes in full town crier regalia, the blue wool coat with brass buttons, the tricorn hat, the buckled shoes. He posed with his brass bell, struck various dramatic stances, and provided a brief sample of his tour narration for the camera. Derek asked about the special effects people had been posting online, the vanishing woman at the local bar. Augustus said with confidence that Abigail's demonstrations were quite remarkable. He wasn't entirely sure how she accomplished the effect, some combination of stagecraft and misdirection, but it certainly added to the atmosphere. The Historical Society had been wonderfully supportive of bringing the town's past to life. Maria got extensive footage of Augustus in costume, his shop full of antiques serving as a perfect backdrop. Derek thanked him and asked where they could grab a bite to eat. Augustus recommended Marcy's Diner, just up at the corner of Main and Bay. Excellent food, charming atmosphere, very authentic. Marcy's Diner was moderately busy when they arrived, the lunch crowd starting to filter in. Derek and Maria took a booth near the window, and Marcy appeared almost immediately with menus and a warm greeting. She mentioned seeing the news van outside and asked if they were in town for a story. Derek explained about the Halloween feature, the ghost tours, the town's reputation for embracing its history. Marcy smiled and said they certainly had their share of stories. Old buildings, old families, the kind of place where history felt close to the surface. As for the ghost tours, she thought Augustus did a wonderful job. People loved them, especially this time of year. Derek asked if she'd mind answering a few questions on camera after they ate. Marcy agreed easily, suggesting they film in the diner. It would give viewers a sense of the place. They ordered lunch, a turkey club for Derek, a burger for Maria. Nate appeared with their drinks, setting them down with a friendly smile. He asked if they were enjoying their visit to Gull'sHaven. Derek said they were noting what a charming town it was. Maria was already composing shots in her mind, the vintage diner aesthetic, the locals at the counter, the whole Norman Rockwell quality of it. Their food arrived quickly, and it was good, the kind of simple, well-prepared meal that reminded you why diners existed. While they ate, Derek reviewed his questions for Marcy, thinking about how to frame the segment. Small-town traditions, Halloween spirit, the appeal of ghost stories in an age of technology. After lunch, Maria set up for the interview. She positioned Marcy near the counter, the diner visible behind her, good natural light from the windows. Derek asked about the town's relationship with its history, whether the ghost stories were taken seriously. Marcy explained that Gull'sHaven had always valued its past. The stories got passed down, sometimes embellished, sometimes forgotten and rediscovered. As for ghosts, she thought people enjoyed the mystery of it. Halloween brought it all to the surface, gave everyone permission to wonder a little. Derek asked about the viral videos, the woman who seemed to vanish at the local bar. Marcy said Abigail was quite the performer. The videos were fun, but they were just that, performance. People loved a good trick, especially when it was well done. It added to the festive atmosphere. During the interview, Nate moved through the background, refilling coffee cups, clearing tables, completely natural. Maria's camera caught him in several shots, just another employee going about his work. No one would have any reason to think otherwise. Derek thanked Marcy for her time, paid the bill with a generous tip, and suggested to Maria they head down to the waterfront for some shots of the harbor. The town dock was busy with the afternoon work of a fishing community. Lobster boats tied up at the moorings, men unloading traps and sorting catches, the smell of salt and diesel and fish strong in the air. Derek thought it would make excellent B-roll, the working waterfront contrasting with the tourist-friendly Main Street. Gus Adams was in his small harbormaster's office when they knocked. He looked up from his paperwork, taking in the camera equipment and press credentials with an expression that gave nothing away. Derek introduced himself and said they were there to get some footage of the harbor and ask a few questions about the town's maritime character. Gus said they were welcome to film what they liked. As for questions, he'd answer what he could. They set up outside, the harbor stretching behind them, boats and water and the distant lighthouse providing a perfect backdrop. Derek asked Gus about Gull'sHaven's fishing heritage and how the town balanced tourism with its working waterfront. Gus gave straightforward answers, explaining how lobstering remained viable, how some families had been working these waters for generations, how the town tried to preserve what mattered while adapting to changing times. He was articulate but careful, the kind of person who understood that words on camera had weight. Derek brought up the ghost tours, asking if the maritime history included any supernatural elements. Gus said every coastal town had its share of stories. Ships lost at sea, fishermen who never came home, lighthouses that kept burning long after they should have gone dark. Whether those stories reflected something real or just the human need to remember, he couldn't say. But the stories persisted. It was a good answer, Derek thought. Measured, authentic, just mysterious enough to work for the segment. Maria got excellent footage of Gus against the working harbor. As they wrapped up, Gus asked casually when the piece would air. "Probably the following evening," Derek said. Gus nodded, his expression thoughtful. Derek and Maria noticed the massive ship anchor set near the back of the parking area, partially buried in the gravel in front of the rusty anchor. Maria asked if that was the bar where the woman had disappeared. Gus said he didn't know anything about anyone disappearing, only that the ghost tours usually ended there. After they left, Gus stood on the dock for a long moment, looking out at the harbor. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. The rusty anchor was quiet when Derek and Maria entered, just past 2 in the afternoon. Roy was wiping down the bar, the lunch crowd gone, the evening crowd not yet arrived. He looked up as they came in, taking in the camera equipment with a neutral expression. Derek explained their purpose, and Roy said they were welcome to look around. He continued cleaning while they filmed, the interior of the bar with its fishing nets and old photographs, the weathered wood and nautical decorations that felt authentic because they were. Derek asked if they could ask him a few questions, and Roy agreed with a shrug. Maria set up the shot while Derek consulted his notes. At the far end of the bar, Slim sat on his usual stool, watching a rerun of some cooking competition on the television above the bar. He had his cowboy hat tipped low, a plate of food in front of him, completely still except for the occasional movement of fork to mouth. He didn't acknowledge the news crew's presence. Derek started his questions, asking Roy about the bar's history, the ghost tour connection, the videos that had been circulating online. Roy gave measured answers, explaining the building's past as a bait and tackle shop, noting that locals enjoyed their traditions, acknowledging that Abigail's demonstrations were popular, but declining to speculate on how they were done. He had the manner of someone who'd tended bar long enough to know when to talk and when to stay quiet. Maria, meanwhile, had noticed Slim. There was something compelling about him, the stillness, the period cowboy hat, the way he seemed to exist in his own space, separate from the rest of the bar. She panned the camera over, getting footage of him at the end of the bar, a solitary figure that added atmosphere to the shot. Derek finished with Roy and noticed what Maria was filming. He approached Slim carefully, aware that some people didn't appreciate being photographed without permission. He introduced himself and asked if Slim worked at the bar. Slim glanced at him briefly, then returned his attention to the television. He confirmed he ran the kitchen. Derek asked if he'd mind being interviewed, if he had any thoughts about the town's ghost stories. Slim said he didn't. Derek waited, but Slim offered nothing more. It wasn't hostile, just complete disinterest. Maria kept filming anyway, drawn to the visual. The silent cook in the cowboy hat, the empty bar, the afternoon light through the windows. It had a quality she couldn't quite name. After a moment, Derek thanked Roy for his time. As they gathered their equipment, Maria took a few more shots of Slim, who continued eating without acknowledgement. She found herself wondering if he might be one of the ghosts people talked about. The stillness, the period clothing, the way he seemed slightly removed from normal interaction. It would make a good angle for the story. Slim finally looked directly at the camera, his expression flat. Then he stood, picked up his plate, and walked back into the kitchen without a word. Derek and Maria left the rusty anchor with what they thought was excellent material. They had the interviews, the local color, the atmospheric shots. Maria mentioned she wanted to get some general footage of Main Street before they left. Maybe catch some of the period-dressed Historical Society volunteers, if any were around. They were loading equipment back into the van when Abigail appeared, walking down Main Street with her characteristic energy. She wore one of her usual combinations, modern jeans with what looked like a Victorian-era blouse, layers of scarves and jewelry that shouldn't have worked together, but somehow did. She noticed the news van and changed direction, heading straight for them with a curious smile. She asked if they were the news people, and Derek confirmed they were from Channel 7 Portland. Abigail introduced herself, mentioning she'd heard they were in town. She asked what they thought of Gull'sHaven so far. Derek said it was charming, exactly what they'd hoped for. Then, recognizing the opportunity, he asked if she was the woman from the videos, the one who did the vanishing demonstrations. Abigail admitted she was, her eyes sparkling with amusement. She asked if they wanted to take some photos. Maria grabbed her camera immediately, and Abigail posed against the backdrop of Main Street, hamming it up a little, clearly enjoying herself. She struck various theatrical poses, gestured dramatically, played to the camera with practiced ease. Derek asked if she'd be willing to demonstrate the vanishing effect. Abigail said she could do a little something, though it worked better in the evening with the right atmosphere. Still, she could give them a taste. Maria kept the camera rolling as Abigail stepped into the middle of the sidewalk. She gave them a playful look, like someone about to tell a joke, then shifted her weight and moved. Not fast, exactly, just oddly. For a second, Maria thought she'd bumped the focus ring. When she corrected it, Abigail was no longer where she'd been standing. She was a few steps farther down the sidewalk, near the entrance to a gift shop, turned half sideways as if she'd simply drifted there between frames. Derek blinked, his brain supplying the obvious explanation that he'd looked away for a moment, that she'd moved quicker than expected. Abigail smiled and took another step. Maria adjusted her framing, tracking her, convinced she'd missed something obvious. A car rolled past behind them, briefly drawing the eye. When the street cleared, Abigail was suddenly closer to the curb, angled toward Main Street, hands clasped behind her back as if she'd been there all along. There was no rush of motion, no blur, just a change in position that felt wrong only in hindsight. Abigail lifted her hands slightly, like someone concluding a parlor trick, and laughed. She told them that was all she could do during daylight. Evenings were better. She walked back to where she'd started, retracing the distance at a normal pace. She asked if they got what they needed. Derek let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, proclaiming that it was great. Maria lowered the camera, already replaying the sequence in her head. She checked her settings out of habit, focus, shutter, stabilization. Everything looked normal. Whatever Abigail had done, it had been clean, smooth, the kind of thing that would look fantastic once it was cut together. Abigail thanked them for stopping by and headed down Main Street, slipping into one of the shops without any particular flourish. Derek and Maria finished loading the van and began the drive back to Portland, both of them excited about the footage they'd captured. Derek was already composing the script in his mind, the angle about small-town traditions meeting modern social media, the way communities kept their history alive through storytelling and performance. Back at the station that evening, Maria began reviewing the footage while Derek wrote the script. The interviews were solid, the atmospheric shots beautiful, the whole piece coming together nicely. Then Maria reached the segment with Abigail on Main Street. She watched it once, then again, then called Derek over to her editing bay. What Maria had captured on camera was impossible. There were no cuts, no edits, no tricks of perspective. The footage was continuous, and it showed Abigail disappearing and reappearing in different locations. One frame she was there, the next frame she was somewhere else entirely. No blur of movement, no fade, just instantaneous movement. Derek stared at the screen. He suggested maybe it was a camera malfunction, but Maria pointed out the background remained stable, a man walking by with a dog on a leash, frame by frame, perfectly normal. Only Abigail defied physics. They showed it to the assignment editor, who watched it 3 times without speaking. Then she said they were leading with this on Friday's broadcast. This wasn't just a local Halloween story anymore. This was news. The segment aired Friday evening at 6. By 7, it had been picked up by the network. By 8, it was trending on social media. By Saturday morning, 2 more news crews had arrived in Gull'sHaven. Seth Morrison's phone started ringing before he'd finished his first cup of coffee. Clara Winslow called to say there were news vans parked along Main Street. Harold McBride reported people in town looking for the woman from the video. The town clerk called to say she was being inundated with interview requests. By noon, Seth had fielded calls from CNN, NBC, and CBS. A major network was sending a crew up for a full investigation piece, planning to arrive Monday. The story was being framed as potential evidence of paranormal phenomena, the footage analyzed by supposed experts who declared it either genuine or the most sophisticated hoax they'd ever seen. Seth sat in his truck in the town hall parking lot, watching another news van pull onto Main Street. This was a problem, a serious problem. The kind of attention that could threaten the delicate balance the town had maintained for centuries. He made some calls, first to Gus, then to Marcy. Marcy talked to Bob Finch, and Bob Finch notified Captain Elwood. It was the same procedure used countless times in Gull'sHaven when problems needed fixing. An emergency meeting, he said. Tonight, after the town was quiet, town hall, assembly room. Living and dead both needed to be there. Word spread through Gull'sHaven's ghost community with the efficiency of a network that had existed for hundreds of years. By 9 that evening, the assembly room was filling up. Ghosts arrived wearing clothing from various times, some looking concerned, others confused, a few seeming excited by all the attention. Captain Elwood stood near the front, his 1840s captain's coat perfectly pressed as always. Bob Finch sat in his usual spot in the back row, his ranger uniform neat, his expression thoughtful. Abigail sat near the center, looking uncharacteristically subdued. The living attendees were fewer, just 3. Seth Morrison, as town selectman and the one who'd called the meeting. Gus Adams, who knew more about the town's ghosts than almost anyone. And Marcy Evans, who knew most things about Gull'sHaven, and had been working beside her ghostly son for 10 years. At 9:15, Captain Elwood called the meeting to order. His voice carried the authority of someone who'd commanded ships and men, and who'd been organizing the ghost community for over a century. He explained that they were gathered to address a situation that threatened the town's equilibrium. Seth stood and outlined the problem: the news coverage, the viral footage, the incoming media attention. By Monday, there would be network cameras looking for proof of the paranormal. The town was about to be scrutinized in ways it had never experienced. An elderly ghost in colonial dress raised her hand and asked what a network was. Seth explained patiently that networks were television stations broadcasting to millions of people across the country and cameras that could capture and share images instantly. The kind of attention that would make it very difficult for the ghost community to remain undetected. The mood in the room was confused, some understanding the gravity of the situation, others seeing it as an exciting development, many simply not comprehending what television coverage meant in the modern world. Abigail stood, and the room quieted. She looked genuinely remorseful as she explained that this was her fault. She'd been showing off for the camera, not thinking about the consequences. She'd been doing her tricks for tourists for so long, treating it like a game, never imagining it would spread beyond town. She apologized. Captain Elwood acknowledged her apology, noting that what was done was done. The question now was how to address it. They needed a strategy. Suggestions began flowing, some practical, many absurd. A ghost in Victorian dress proposed they all appear at once, overwhelming the news crews with so many ghosts they wouldn't know what to film. Someone else suggested they avoid television cameras entirely, which another ghost pointed out was impossible since they didn't know what television cameras looked like. A fisherman ghost wondered if they could haunt the news vans until the crews left town. Bob Finch quietly noted that the Bull Island Lighthouse had plenty of room if anyone needed to hide for a while. The chaos built, voices overlapping, with ghosts from different historical eras talking past each other. The fundamental problem of organizing beings who existed outside normal time became apparent. Captain Elwood raised his hand for silence. They needed to be practical, he said. They needed a plan that the living could execute, with the ghosts supporting from the shadows. Seth had been taking notes, and he outlined a multi-part strategy. First, Abigail needed to disappear, literally and figuratively. News reporters would be looking for her, wanting interviews and demonstrations. If she wasn't available, that angle of the story would die. He suggested the upstairs apartment at the firehouse, empty since the last fire chief retired. The ghosts could keep her company, but she needed to stay completely out of sight until the media attention passed. Abigail agreed without argument. Second, Seth proposed they organize a Halloween parade, scheduled for Halloween Day itself. Nothing elaborate, just a costumed march down Main Street. Augustus Albee could lead, he would love doing it. The town would be celebrating the holiday like any small town might. But here was the key, only the living would participate. They'd encourage residents to wear period clothing if they wanted, but make it clear it was just Halloween fun. The news cameras would see ordinary people in costumes, nothing supernatural, nothing that couldn't be explained as holiday enthusiasm. Several ghosts began to object at once, voices overlapping, but Captain Elwood raised a hand and the room quieted. The living needed to be seen acting normally, he said. That meant the ghosts staying out of sight entirely. No appearances, no demonstrations, no helpful little touches meant to improve the atmosphere. Gull'sHaven had to look exactly like what it claimed to be, a small town enjoying Halloween. The ghost community grumbled, muttered, and exchanged looks, but in the end they agreed. Marcy raised her hand and reminded everyone that Augustus Albee had one more ghost tour scheduled before Halloween. It was already heavily booked, and the press would certainly attend. She suggested they pack it with locals wearing period clothing, people who could support Albee's stories without doing anything supernatural. Make it look like an enthusiastic historical reenactment, nothing more. Seth liked that idea. He said he'd recruit a dozen residents himself, people who could be trusted to stay in character, but avoid anything that might feed the ghost narrative. Finally, Gus spoke up. He'd been thinking about the footage of Abigail at the Rusty Anchor, the video evidence that was driving all this attention. They couldn't make it disappear, but they might be able to explain it. He had a friend who could help, a magician from Boston. With some research and the right technical language, they could plant the seed that what appeared on camera was illusion, something involving camera angles and timing and misdirection. It wouldn't convince everyone, but it would give skeptics something to latch onto, plausible deniability. The room fell quiet as everyone absorbed the plan. It wasn't perfect, but it was workable. Hide Abigail, normalize the Halloween celebration, support the ghost tour without supernatural elements, and provide alternative explanations for the footage. The Gull'sHaven ghost community needed to stay in the shadows and away from Main Street. Give the media nothing to work with, wait for them to lose interest, and move on to the next story. For the next week, Gull'sHaven would be exactly what it appeared to be on the surface. An historic coastal town celebrating Halloween, with its deeper truths carefully kept out of sight. If you're enjoying these stories from Gull'sHaven, please like and subscribe. Thank you.